we'll be sharing the challenges of aviation sector, decarbonization, and how Malaysian Aviation Group, as a national carrier, can support nation-building efforts to decarbonize. Let's welcome Philip.
Okay. Okay. Good morning. Thank you so much. In case you don't know, I work for Malaysia Aviation Group, and if you hear me sometimes on radio, I'm also a part-time radio presenter at BFM. So a bit about myself. I have two portfolios. I am the Chief Sustainability Officer. I hope to be the first and also the last, because that means you effectively institutionalize sustainability in the group. But on the flip side, I'm also the CEO of the Loyalty and Travel Services function, which is quite ironic because both roles sometimes contradict. When you want one person to rethink its footprint when they travel, on the other role, I think about how do we get a loyal customer to travel more with us. So I appreciate the irony there. It's very interesting. In my other role, I play as a radio presenter for BFM. I interview many CEOs, and MNC CEOs are very eager to burnish their sustainability credentials, but perhaps the local CEOs struggle to do so, or actually are more hesitant to do so. And perhaps this case study with the aviation group is perhaps give you some solace in terms of how you can get your sustainability work moving forward. Just a bit of history for Malaysia Aviation Group. We went through a very painful time, as many of you know. In addition to that, we launched our sustainability blueprint 3 years ago, with actually then the Minister of Technology, Khairi Jamaluddin, launching it. It was a very interesting time because it was the height of the pandemic, and I hope it provides hope for many of you here, where you perhaps have not thought about the journey that for an organization of us with 20 billion revenue, 12,000 people operating in 40, 50 markets, being able to do something like this in the height of the pandemic was a huge struggle. And we made some progress, but I can tell you there's a lot more work to do on our side. Now, if you look at the aviation industry in whole, it's a very interesting industry because it's cross-border in nature. And when Mark was asking us to imagine what our home was, I was quite embarrassed because my home was my visual of my porch with my two dogs. But it's ironic because if you talk to aviation players, we actually have a very global mindset because if you think about it, we operate in multiple markets and naturally our emissions is cross-border by nature. And the conclusion of that is that when we do our work, we're not only governed by national commitments, it's governed by regional global commitments that are across industry and across the world. And the big challenge with the aviation industry is that there's so many issues for you to, get involved in. On the left side, there's energy, waste, water, emissions management, which of course all of you know. On the community side, it's also understanding about diversity and basically addressing many issues about your neighboring markets and communities you operate in. And on the governance side, your supply chain. Think about our engine supplier to our laundromats, to our caterers across our multiple markets. And think about the role we play in human trafficking and wild trafficking across the border. So one of the biggest challenges in the aviation industry is that there's so many areas for you to focus on with respect to how do you make the world a better place. And that is one of the biggest central challenges every organization has to deal with. And I think in my personal humble view, to start any journey, you just have to start somewhere and just pick 3 to 4 battles that really, really work for you, that truly resonate for you personally. Now, before you think about the work you do, and this is really from our perspective of where do you start, it's so important to be clear about the data and technology options you have available for you to basically plan the roadmap. The problem with the aviation industry is that it is a hard-to-abate industry. The reality is that, we can talk about being sustainable, but the reality, we are not, right? That's why when we launched our blueprint, it was called Sustainable Tomorrow. Because the reality is, I'm not sustainable today. But the goal is, what are the actions I take today for a much better tomorrow? And to do that, you really need to be data-centric and anchored. Now, the aviation industry has made a commitment to be net zero by 2050. That's all well and good, but that is 35 years away, 25 years away. And if you ask most experts, they will tell you it's near impossible for us to achieve that. What we have done on MAG side is be very clear with what our midterm targets are. And I'm going to give you an example about how challenging it is to even lock down midterm commitments as a whole. But being clear about what are your levers to decarbonize and to move the needle is very important. For the airline industry, there are four major levers. The first is how do you just get more efficiency in your operations? How do you reduce your footprint by just driving a reduction in consumption and usage? That's something I think most CEOs will get on board because that's easy. The second part is really how do you shift to better aircraft, better technologies for us? For example, our new 737-8s and the incoming 330neos, they give you 15 to 16% lower CO2 emissions. But that won't move the needle. And that's why we in the industry need to be bolder and think about more transformative technologies like hydrogen beyond 2030. The third and most important work is actually biofuels. And this is what I think if you heard the minister talk about sustainable aviation fuel. But that's such a big challenge because getting the right feedstock to actually power our aircraft is extremely painful. Give you an example, use cooking oil. Very easy, very nice to do. But is it easy to collect it? Is it easy to verify it? Is it easy to make sure that it is legitimate, right? It's some of the central work that we have to do. So let's be very clear that the work we do here is arduous, it's painful, it's detailed, and requires really thoughtful execution when you deliver this work. Data is so essential for us when we set our goals. Let me give you an example. We've been having a conversation about how do we get more women in our technical roles, especially our pilots and our engineers. Currently, only 3 out of 100 pilots are women. And so there was this big hoo-ha about, oh, let's make sure by 2030, we need 10% of our pilots being women. And everybody was on board. But actually, if you look at the proper statistics, you look at the recruitment data, you actually analyze it, the reality, what that means is if you take into account attrition, 1 in 5 recruitment has to be women. And at this stage, you're only doing 1 out of 8. So that's the tough questions you have to ask. Can you practically deliver even something like a 10% gender target for a misrepresented area like pilots? And those are hard debates you have to do, but you should not be fazed by it. Be clear about what you want to do. Be guided by the data, have very clear analysis about what you need to do so that you can plan ahead and deliver the numbers. So we in MAG, we are not a listed company, but because we are so anchored with our data, we have been committed to produce our data, our annual reports on an annual basis. Not obligated, but we feel that if we launch a plan, how do you track your progress and be anchored on the data? And that's what we've been doing. And across the board, right, leveraging technology on things like, for example, getting you to choose to voluntarily offset your flights, or even changing your calorie. All these are very incremental but important steps to move towards decarbonization. I want to give you an example about sometimes me as the Chief Sustainability Officer going against some of the sustainability initiatives we do. So we're doing some budget planning for the next 5 years. And my ground equipment team wanted to start transitioning all the equipment to electric vehicles. But I said to him, what's the point? Because your source of energy is still coal and gas. How are you practically driving your emissions down if you are just starting to do the transition to EVs? It doesn't move the needle for you at all. But they say, look, if they want to get third-party business, their key KPI is electrification of their asset. But that doesn't meet my objective about reducing emissions as a whole. Why don't you think of a different option like biofuels? So these are the tensions you as a business, you as a chief sustainability lead and team must be able to integrate the business requirements with the sustainability challenges you have. Because there's so much talk about it, and the world is misguided with many wrong expectations that you must be anchored with your core priorities, what is important to you. And the only way to do that is to be anchored on your data. So with my aviation service team, I said, look, let's set the top line target. What are you going to do by 2030? How much emissions are you going to reduce? What's your emission intensity targets in 5 years? What can you practically achieve? and then just work backwards to deliver the number. So I think that's very important when you start doing this work. It can be very daunting, but pick your battles and go deep and be very analysis driven when you do this work. I want to say that as Malaysia Aviation Group, it's very important to embed the values of what you as a company do to how you make a difference, not only your country, but to the world. So we are in the business of connecting communities. So it was a natural consideration for us to work with partners like Cancer Action Network, where we basically help low-income people, low-income children go to KL for further treatment for connecting communities. So thinking very closely about what you can bring to the table, leveraging your assets, so that you can make sure that it's always aligned with what your values are and what your business objectives are. And this is something we were happy to do. How do you help connect people and bring expertise and all around into KL so that they get the right treatment forward? How do we get more women across many of our technical professions? It's so important. And this is a big struggle. For MAG, diversity is very important. And as we were talking about how do we create equal opportunities, we actually this year got our first batch of Orang Asli to be our cabin crew. But the work is incredible. We had to invest 3 to 4 weeks to convince local communities that actually they can find an opportunity to be a cabin crew. And in the end, we only got 3 cabin crew. But this is the hard work, but all I can tell you is that that work is extremely rewarding. So I hope if anything you got from this short presentation today is that, look, it can be very daunting the work you do, but if you start, you pick the 3, 4 battles you want to do and be anchored on clear data analysis and set some really meaningful short-term targets, you can truly make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. We have one question for you.
Oh, excellent question. What was very clear is when we started the journey, we simply copy-pasted because as an aviation industry, there's so many models happening all around the world, honestly, right? But when you start maturing and understanding what works for you, you then begin to think, what are the things that actually you can do extremely well? So I'll give you an example. Waste management was a big challenge for us, and we've been doing in-flight audits. But we couldn't be a leader in that because of, as many of you know, the challenges we had with our catering facility in Malaysia. So because of that, we decided we wouldn't be a leader on that, but we would be a leader on something else. But if we look at Malaysia, there's so much opportunity in sustainable aviation fuel. So we think, okay, we may not be a global leader, but let's take the lead in that. So there are some areas you pick and choose your battles. Generally, there's a clear framework. The leadership is about what you prioritize and how do you make it work in your respective environment. So we don't lead for the sake of leading. We lead for the sake that we can execute more efficiently compared to the rest. Yeah, so is MAG going to follow other airlines in using SAF? That's a very important question. We are, and actually we are the first 1 or 2 airlines in the region to actually do pilot phases of SAF. We're actually working with partners to actually deploy SAF, not only in Malaysia, but across our markets. So the answer is not only following, but actually work lockstep with other airlines to actually deploy SAF because it's a global challenge. What steps are being taken to minimize waste and improve recycling processes on board? This is the painful part. There's a team we were just going through, and you have to actually look at the audits of your flights. And the amount of food waste that comes into actually coming out from your flight is incredible. They can up to 60 to 70% of waste. The most important thing we can do is to reduce the inputs, actually. And what we have to do is actually drive greater adoption of how you pick your meals and choose your meals before you fly so that you can reduce wastage. We've tried stuff before, like Black Soldier Lava Fry to do composting and all that. It's minimal effort. We tried it, it didn't work, we move on. So what we will plan to do is once our catering facility stabilizes, we will then look at redesigning our facility. And our new equipment coming in also has an ability to do separation of waste on board. So this is the hard work we have to do on the waste side. I think, yeah, I think we've covered everything. How do you actually balance the battles within an organization of profit versus to be environmentally responsible? I think this is the role I play, right, as the Chief Sustainability Officer, which is to integrate the business objectives with the sustainability objectives. What we have been doing in the past, 2-3 months is to really model what is the impact of all these commitments we make, be it carbon offsets, be it sustainable aviation fuel, being transitioning out our SUP, single-use plastics by 2030, and then actually saying, look, here's what the cost is, what are the right financing models to do that? Before you talk about balancing it, be clear about the size of the challenge so that then you can think about the solutions. So there are certain ways we are thinking about on how to do it. So for instance, when you think about some of the work we do in reducing emissions, that's also plowed back right into a pool for you to reinvest into other parts of the business as well. So it's also thinking about the work you do on the different levers, the savings that are generated from there, and how that generated savings is redeployed elsewhere across the infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you for the